Hello, welcome to my channel, or welcome back if you've been here before. My name is Bethanne, and today I wanted to just talk briefly about the Home Place, Memoirs of a Colored Man's Love Affair with Nature by J. Drew Lanham, which I read as part of the Book Naturalists book club. This was the selection for February, and that book club is hosted by Heidi over at My Reading Life and Doris at Aldi Books, so I will post links to their channels in the description box below. Yeah, I was really excited to choose this book, or to read this book in particular, because J. Drew Lanham is an ornithologist, and he's an academic ornithologist. He's a professor at Clemson University, but he's also a very avid birder, as well as kind of doing it professionally in an academic setting. He's one of the kind of pillars of the birding community of the South, so a name that I was familiar with going into this. Yeah, I was just very excited to learn more about him. So this is his memoir. It starts way back in his childhood and with a little bit of family history of his parents' generation and his grandmother and grandfather, and then moves up through his graduate degree and just kind of very briefly touches on some of his professional life. So I did find that the earlier chapters that really focus on his family history and his experience growing up in rural South Carolina on a farm. His family owned about 200 acres, if I'm remembering that correctly, in rural South Carolina, and then his parents were also school teachers as well. And so he had just, I mean, it sounds to me like a perfect upbringing as somebody who really values education and really values my own childhood spent romping around outdoors. You can just really see, and he talks explicitly about sort of these dual threads that were passed down through the generations in his family, kind of a love of education and an appreciation of learning and kind of pushing to excel in those areas, with a real connection to the land, and a connection to the production of the land and having working land. So I just really love those early chapters, and I found them to be kind of the most evocative. I feel like the writing was the most powerful in those early chapters, both from the natural history standpoint of just really describing backwoods South Carolina really beautifully, but also in the development of his self. We really get that in those early years. Whereas I found some of the later passages, as he developed into an adult and became more of an academic, and they were just much more kind of biographical rather than memoir, in my opinion. It was less evocative. I felt less like I was kind of getting to know him and having a connection with him through his story, and more just like, okay, yeah, this is his life. And I do find that a lot actually with some of the recent memoirs I've read. So the one that kind of immediately made me think of this was Michelle Obama's Becoming, where similarly in the early chapters, I kind of felt like I was having a strong connection with her and was, really gaining some understanding of who she was. And then it just got a little more kind of clinical, and less emotional as she moved into the later chapters about her adult life. And so I kind of felt that a little bit, same sense in J. Drew Lanham's book, which is not really a critique. It's just that to me, it almost felt like there was a different tone in the first, I would say maybe half of the book than in the second half of the book, because the shift in tone kind of happened slowly and gradually. So I almost didn't quite notice it until I got towards the end. And then I was like, oh yeah, the whole last section, I wasn't really feeling really like swept up in it. So just wanted to throw that out there, but I just loved some of the things that he was writing about, and some of the things are very topical. Thinking about race relations in the U.S., thinking about the experience of Black Americans, particularly Black Americans in the American South, who are descended from former slaves. And so he's talking about that a lot, especially towards the later end of his book, when he did go through a fairly big effort to try to trace some of his roots and his genealogy and figure out, beyond his great-grandparents' generation, who was he descended from? And those sorts of narratives always really hit me hard because of the contrast between that experience where, because of the transatlantic slave trade, people were ripped away from their families, and they have those really big gaps. So he is able to kind of hypothetically trace his ancestry back to a slave in the 1700s who moved with white slave owners down to South Carolina. But then there's a big gap between that person and his great grandparents. And then, of course, he only has kind of genetic correlation to think about where his roots are from in Africa itself. So just the disruption of all those lines of descent. And then someone like me, a white American, purely of European ancestry, in some of my family, the parts that are more recent immigrants, we have less information. Things might start when somebody reached these shores, or maybe we only go back a generation or two in Europe. But in some other parts of my family, it's like part of my English family, we go back to 1066, where we know in a direct chain of descent, like who we're descended from. Part of my German family, we have church records of birth and marriage that go back to the 1400s. I'm descended from 3 people on the frickin' Mayflower, and we're just regular people. We're not rich or famous or aristocratic or anything, just regular people that have those records. And so just that kind of discrepancy and family disruption to me is really powerful. And it's hard to think about, but I really appreciate kind of being reminded of that, and it lets me kind of appreciate the privilege that I have for having those chains and having that documentation. It's really kind of a gift to have that knowledge, and it is a gift that was acquired at the expense of other people. So that stinks. I really appreciated all of that discussion that he goes through. And then one other interesting thing was he talks about an episode from when he was a boy, and he got a BB gun for Christmas, which was you needed to have a BB gun. And so he went out with the intent of I got a BB gun, I got to kill something. And so he does, over the course of the day, kill a sparrow, and then is immediately just struck with that is not the right way to do things. You don't go kill something because you want to kill something. That is not right. But then as he grew up and became an adult, he actually became a hunter, and is now, he now hunts on his, the remnant of his family's own land. Because I think he still owns 7 acres of that original 200 acres, but then he and I think other members of his family also own 120 acres nearby that came through his mother's side of the family. So not the land that he grew up on, but nearby land. And so he talks about, as an adult, how being a hunter and doing the hunting things, being in a deer stand before dawn, really maintains his connection to the land. And Heidi talked a little bit about this in her review of this book, which I'll link below. But as a modern conservationist, I do really appreciate the hunting community. I mean, so much of our preserve system in the U.S., the National Wildlife Refuge system, is paid for primarily by hunters. It's not something that's paid for by taxes. It's paid for by the permits and the licenses that hunters buy in order to hunt on those lands. And hunters share a deep sense of the health of the ecosystem and a desire to support the ecosystem that non-hunting scientists and environmentalists like me, that's what I care about. And they care about it too, because if you pollute all the lakes and let all the ducks die, there are no more ducks to hunt for them, and there are no more ducks to enjoy for me. And so there really is a very tight connection between, these different people who use land in different ways and appreciate it in different ways. But we're all working toward the same thing. We all want the same thing. We want a functioning, intact ecosystem. And so much, especially in kind of the cultural and political narrative, hunters are pitted against environmentalists, which I think is wrong and really sad. And it shouldn't be that way. And even just a couple decades ago, it wasn't that way. And it's partly the association of looking at who are the people who hunt, and they're often people in rural areas. And so then there's a correlation with how our national politics work in rural areas. And I don't want to kind of deny, some of the very real issues there, but it's like, at least on issues of conservation, we have a lot more in common than we do have things that we're in disagreement about, conservation speaking. So I just really appreciated Drew's narratives about hunting and kind of connection to the land, and how he accesses that connection to the land, and how it was different when he was a kid versus now when he's adult, kind of the ways that he is present and maintains that connection to the land. So I've been talking about this for a long time, but it was just a beautifully written natural history narrative, coming of age narrative. I mentioned some of the racial things, so a little bit about just that experience of growing up as a Black man in the South. I just really loved this, and I kind of wish everybody would read it. I'm like kind of plotting. I'm like, who can I buy this for? Who needs to read this? So I'll be doing that. Anyway, all right. If you are not already subscribed to me, go ahead and hit that subscribe button below, and I will see you in the next video. Thanks. Bye.